Welcome to this lesson on modifiers with me, Elena. Let's start off with an important question. What is a modifying clause? Otherwise known as a modifier. We'll use those terms kind of interchangeably here because they're the same thing. Well, there's a couple of things that we should know about modifying clauses. They are phrases that help make sentences interesting. They provide information or description to a sentence. They usually contain adjectives, which are words that describe nouns, or adverbs, which are words that describe verbs. They are very easy to misplace, and this is the important part. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that part of modifiers by asking how modifiers actually work. We'll take a look at this sentence. Diana ran. We've got a subject, Diana, a verb, ran. That's it. We just have Diana running. There's nothing else to this sentence. But take a look at this sentence. Her heart pounding furiously, Diana, who had been training for this race for the past year, ran as if her life depended upon it to reach the finish line first. Wow, that's a way more interesting sentence than just Diana ran, right? And that's thanks to modifiers. All of these phrases in bold here, her heart pounding furiously, who'd been training for this race for the past year, as if her life depended on it to reach the finish line first, those are all modifiers. They're just phrases that describe Diana, how she was acting, what her history is with this race, and how she took the action in this sentence. That's what modifiers do. They make sentences more interesting by adding description and information and just more context to what's going on besides a simple subject and verb. But here's the thing. Each one of these modifiers is very carefully placed into this sentence. What if we mixed them up? Her heart pounding furiously for the past year. That sounds like a health problem you should get checked out. Diana, who had been training for this race as if her life depended upon it, ran to reach the finish line first. Okay, so what I've done with this sentence is I've moved around some of these modifiers, and it totally changes the meaning of the sentence. It now sounds like Diana's has a heart that's been pounding furiously for an entire year, which sounds not great. That she'd been training for this race as if her life depended on it, rather than just running as if her life depended on it, to reach the finish line first. That completely changes what the original sentence meant. And that's why it matters where we put modifiers. We want to make sure we're putting these phrases in the correct place in the sentence so that the sentence will actually make sense. Now, if this seems pretty broad to you, that's okay. It's kind of a broad topic. What we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to break down 3 key rules for dealing with modifiers. Let's go ahead and start with rule number 1. Keep it close. Basically, place modifying phrases as close as possible to the thing that they describe. Let's try a problem just to see how this would actually work. We've got our sentence. I went to the store for some vegetables that had just opened. Let's think about if we need to reword this. I went for some vegetables that had just opened to the store, or I went to the store that had just opened for some vegetables. All right, so we've got a lot of options here about stores and vegetables and openings. Let's break it down a little bit. So in this initial sentence, we're told that this person, I, the subject of the sentence, went, so that's our subject and our verb, to the store, that's our little first phrase here, for some vegetables, the second phrase, and a third phrase, that had just opened. Well, this is the big one. What just opened? Did the vegetables just open? That would be pretty weird. Hopefully they didn't just open. It makes a lot more sense for the store to have just opened. I went to the store that had just opened for some vegetables. But with the way the sentence is set up right now, it sounds like the vegetables are the things that had just opened, which doesn't make any sense. So this sentence as it stands right now doesn't work because it places this modifier, that had just opened, in the wrong spot. Let's look at these other options. I went for some vegetables that had just opened to the store. Once again, that places that had just opened right next to vegetables, and that makes it sound like the vegetables have just opened, which we know doesn't make sense. So that doesn't work. What about B? I went to the store that had just opened. that puts our modifier that had just opened and connects it directly to store, which makes a lot of sense. So this really illustrates the fact that we want to keep these modifying phrases, like that had just opened, as close as possible to the thing they describe, because when we start putting distance between the modifier and the thing the modifier describes, things get really confusing really quickly. This is the best way to word this sentence because it takes that modifier and it places it right next to the thing that it describes. It's completely clear, and that's what we're aiming for with these sorts of questions. Let's go ahead and try another problem just to make sure we've really got this down. Here's our sentence, and here's some options for our sentence. So the donuts were in the display case with the pink and white sprinkles. In the display case were the pink and white sprinkles with the donuts. The donuts with the pink and white sprinkles were in the display case. Okay, lots of stuff going on here. And now I'm hungry for donuts. Let's break these sentences down. In our first sentence here, we're told the donuts, it's our subject, right? The donuts. Oops, kind of a straight line there. We've got a verb, were, our subject and verb, and now we've got to break down our different phrases. So in the display case, with the pink and white sprinkles. These are our two modifying phrases. So the donuts were in the display case. Did the display case have pink and white sprinkles on it? That might be a cute display case, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. What would usually have sprinkles in a situation like this? The donuts. That means that this modifier here is in the wrong spot. Right now, this phrase is modifying or describing the display case because it's right next to the display case. We need to find an option that actually places this modifier next to the thing it modifies, the donuts. So, not this. What about A? In the display case were the pink and white sprinkles with the donuts. Well, this one makes it sound like the pink and white sprinkles were totally separate from the donuts. And that's not at all what we got out of the first sentence, right? The donuts are the things that have the pink and white sprinkles. So, not A. That leaves us only with B. The donuts with the pink and white sprinkles were in the display case. That connects this modifier with the pink and white sprinkles directly to the donuts, which means that we've kept our modifier as close as possible to the thing it actually describes. That's why we could choose answer choice B as the best way to word this sentence, because it's the clearest way and the best way to use this modifier. Okay, so that's our first rule, that we want to keep modifiers as close as possible to the thing they actually modify. Let's now move on to talk about our second modifying rule. Keep it clear. What we want to do with this rule is keep sentences clear by putting modifiers close to the things they modify and far from the things they don't modify. Now, if this seems a little bit confusing, let's make it clear by looking at an example. I agreed to stop at the store in order to pick up food for dinner after work. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on in this sentence. Let's see what our answer options could be here. I agreed to pick up food for dinner after work in order to stop at the store. My goodness, that is a mouthful. I agreed to stop at the store after work in order to pick up food for dinner. All right, let's break down what's going on here by dividing up these sentences into their parts. In our original sentence, we have a subject, I, a verb, agreed, and now we've got some different phrases. I agreed to stop at the store in order to pick up food for dinner after work. We could probably just make all of this in order to pick up food for dinner one phrase, but I've divided it up because why not? At least it'll help us move these pieces around in a little bit more clear ways. So let's think about what's going on here. I agreed to stop at the store in order to pick up food for dinner after work. Is there any clearer way to word this sentence? Is there any way we could move these pieces around in order to make it crystal clear what modifies what? Let's think about this one. After work. What is happening after work? Right now, it's placed right next to dinner. Pick up food for dinner after work. Well, is it just dinner that's happening after work? No, it's that this person agrees to stop at the store after work in order to pick up food for dinner. Right now, after work is at the end of the sentence, but it should be closer to the fact that this person is stopping at the store right after work. Let's keep that in mind as we look at our answer choices. What about A? I agreed to pick up food for dinner after work in order to stop at the store. Well, that makes it sound very confusing and different from the original sentence, but basically we've got this whole phrase, this modifier, in order to stop at the store, referring to after work. That doesn't really make sense. This isn't a clearly worded sentence, so let's not choose this as the best answer here. What about B, though? I agreed to stop at the store after work in order to pick up food for dinner. This places our modifier after work right next to store, making it very clear what's going on in this sentence. But it also puts modifiers like in order to pick up food for dinner farther away from store and work, which these phrases don't modify. What we want to do is make sure that our modifiers are close to the things that they describe, but farther away from the things that they don't describe, just so everything stays as clear as possible. Now, maybe that still seems a little bit broad and out there, so let's narrow it down by looking at two specific ways in which we'll need to apply this rule. The first thing that we need to remember with this rule is that in a comparison, we put the modifier right next to the thing being compared. This is the first way in which our keep it clear rule needs to be applied. Let's make this clear by trying a problem together. My painting is more nuanced than you. Ouch, first of all, if you're really saying that a painting is more nuanced than a human, but it's my suspicion that that's not actually what this sentence is trying to say. Let's break down what's going on here. There's a comparison being made, but what's being compared? My painting is being compared to you? Probably not. We would want to compare like things, right? We would want to compare a painting to a painting, a person to a person. So we could say my painting is more nuanced than yours, right? Because that makes it clear that we're comparing my painting and your painting. Or we could say my painting is more nuanced than your painting. Which one is right? Trick question, they could both work. We could say my painting is more nuanced than yours, or my painting is more nuanced than your painting, because both make clear that the thing being compared is the painting. Our modifier, that it's more nuanced than, goes right next to the thing being compared, and we make sure that that comparison is extremely clear. Let's try another problem to make sure we've got this comparison rule down. Emily likes Napolitano Cafe's ice cream better than Sweet Cafe. All right, what is being compared in this question? Napolitano Cafe's ice cream to Sweet Cafe? We wouldn't compare one cafe's actual product to the entire other cafe. We would compare one cafe's ice cream to the other cafe's ice cream. So what are our options? Sweet Cafe's or Sweet Cafe's ice cream? Both work because both make clear that we are comparing ice cream to ice cream. Our modifier is right next to the thing that's being compared, and our comparison is made extremely clear. All right, now that we've got this comparison application down, let's think about the second way that we can apply this rule about keeping it clear. Modifiers can place limits on something in a sentence. What does that mean? Let's take a look. Jeremiah only plays soccer. This makes it sound like Jeremiah only plays one sport, right? He only plays soccer. He doesn't do anything else. That's all that he does. He's just totally focused on soccer. That word in bold, only, that's called a modifying word. A modifier can be as short as just one word. It just has to be something that describes something else. So it modifies the fact that he plays soccer. It tells us he only plays soccer. What if we move this word around, though? Only Jeremiah plays soccer. Whoa, that totally changes the meaning of the sentence. It makes it sound like Jeremiah is the only person ever to play soccer, which probably isn't true, at least based on this picture we've got in front of us, and I would say that's a pretty good sign. What we want to make sure is that whenever we're using a limiting modifier, it's placed in an extremely clear manner so that we know exactly what's going on in the sentence. There are a couple of common limiting words. Words like only, just, almost, hardly, and barely place a limit on something happening in a sentence. Now that we've gone over rules 1 and 2 on keeping your modifiers close and clear, we've talked about some of the different ways these can be applied to comparisons and limits. It's time to look at our final rule for dealing with modifiers. Rule number 3, the comma rule. What's that? Well, the comma rule says that when a modifier begins a sentence and ends with a comma, the thing it modifies has to be placed directly after the comma. Let's see how this works with an example. Completely lost in thought. The pot of water boiled over and I didn't notice. Now think about this really carefully. Here we've got a pot of water that boils over, but we've also got a modifying phrase, completely lost in thought. That describes something going on in the sentence. It begins the sentence. It ends with that comma after thought. But here's the thing. What that modifying phrase modifies needs to come directly after the comma. So is the pot of water completely lost in thought? No, that doesn't make sense. Completely lost in thought can't be describing the pot. It needs to be describing the person. Completely lost in thought, I didn't notice that the pot of water boiled over. Whenever we deal with sentences like these, you want to think really, really carefully about what the modifier is describing and where that thing is in the sentence. Let's look at it with an example, but let's also think about a key way we can approach problems like these. Ask what literally makes sense. Let's do that with this problem. After spending so much time studying for the final, the fact that it featured different material than what was on the study guide frustrated Chris. What are our answer options? Well, the material that differed from what was featured on the study guide frustrated Chris, or Chris was frustrated that it featured different material than what was on the study guide. Let's break this sentence down. Well, we know that we've got a modifier. We have a phrase that's descriptive that starts this sentence, and it ends with this comma. So what we need to ask ourselves is, who was spending so much time studying for the final? Well, what follows that modifier in this sentence is the fact. Did the fact spend a lot of time studying for the final? No, that doesn't make sense, and it breaks our modifying comma rule. So let's cross off this sentence. What about this one? The material that differed from what was featured on the study guide frustrated Chris. Now this starts with the material, which would place the material right after this. Does it make sense that the material spent a lot of time studying for the final? No. We can cross this off too. Finally, answer choice B places Chris right after our modifier. This makes sense. After spending so much time studying for the final, Chris was frustrated, right? Chris is the one who literally spent this time studying for the final. What you want to do is you want to find what literally is taking the action or being described by that modifier, and then make sure it follows that modifier as closely as possible. Let's try one more problem just to make sure we've totally got this rule down. Here's our sentence. While getting ready for the dance, Laura's hair was accidentally burned on the curling iron, and here are our answer choice options. The curling iron accidentally burned Laura's hair, or Laura accidentally burned her hair on the curling iron. Let's break this down. All right, what's our modifier? Well, we've got a comma and a phrase that comes before it. That's our modifier. While getting ready for the dance. What was getting ready for the dance? Well, what follows this modifier in the first sentence? Laura's hair. If you thought it was Laura, pay attention to this little apostrophe S. That means we're really talking about the hair. Was Laura's hair getting ready for the dance? that doesn't really make sense, right? Presumably more of Laura than just her hair was getting ready for the dance. So this doesn't work as our sentence because we can't just put Laura's hair after the modifier because Laura's hair is not what the modifier describes. What about A? That places the curling iron right after the modifier. Was the curling iron literally getting ready for the dance? That would be pretty weird if it was. Probably not A. What about B? That places Laura right after the modifier. Was Laura getting ready for the dance? Yeah, that totally makes sense. While getting ready for the dance, Laura accidentally burned her hair on the curling iron. This is the clearest way to set up the modifier in this sentence because it places our modifier right next to the thing that it modifies. It follows our comma rule, and honestly, it follows all of the rules that we've been talking about so far, keeping our modifiers close, keeping them clear, and making sure when we run into this very specific comma situation that the thing modified is placed directly after the modifying phrase. All right, let's sum this all up. Modifiers are phrases or clauses that describe things in a sentence. They can add more information, add description, use adjectives and adverbs. Basically, they're anything that adds any description at all to a sentence. Modifiers need to be placed close to what they modify. That keeps the sentence clear. Modifiers need to be placed far from what they don't modify. That helps us avoid any confusion in how a sentence is worded. Remember our comma rule. Whenever we have a modifying clause that ends with a comma, the thing that comes right after that modifying clause, right after that comma, has to be the thing described by the modifying clause. Ask yourself, does the sentence literally make sense, especially with the comma rule, to make sure that you're being as clear as possible in your modifier usage?